Well, this morning we start a brand new series entitled Heart of the Matter. Heart of the Matter, and I put the little tagline in there, not a Valentine's series, because I did try to coordinate it with Valentine's and hearts, but just in case you were showing up looking for couples therapy or how to get a date this Valentine's Day, that is not the direction that we're going. In fact, we are talking about the Ten Commandments. So it seems a little bit weird to talk about the Ten Commandments and call it a heart series or connect to like Valentine's Day, but I thought this is the perfect opportunity, the perfect segue to talk about what is really at the heart of the Ten Commandments. And so for the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at the first 4 of the Ten Commandments. Because if you look at the Ten Commandments, if you have any familiarity with the Ten Commandments, there's 10 of them, right? And then there's like 1,000 more that get tacked on, but we really kind of centralize around these 10 commandments. And of those 10, the first 4 really relate to our relationship with God. It was a way for the Israelites and for us looking into that to say, man, this really carves in the heart of what it looks like to have a relationship with God. And then the other 6 are more about how you and I relate to each other, how the Israelites were called to relate to one another in this new beginning, this fresh start that they'd been given. And so we're going to look at those first 4 over the next 4 weeks and really unpack what is the heart of what God is getting into here. You know, if you were to go and just kind of do a street-wide survey and, you know, maybe poll your neighbors or poll somebody that was stopped at the stop sign and say, hey, do you know the Ten Commandments? You'd probably get, first off, a weird look. Second off, like a general kind of a head nod. But research shows that most people can maybe identify 7 of the 10 Commandments. You know, don't kill, don't murder. Then they start to throw in extra ones like, be nice to your neighbors, give me back my lawnmower. You know, they throw in their own little extra ones. So even if you talk about the 10 Commandments, even if you're in here this morning and have never opened a Bible, never been in a church, if you're joining us online and you just happen to type in the wrong address and you're here with us this morning, even if you have no familiarity with Christianity or the Bible, there's probably some like cursory understanding of what the Ten Commandments is, what it means, and what these commands are. If nothing else, to identify it with a little bit of what it means and what God was doing, and it pertains to the Jewish religion and the Christian religion. In some ways, it's a little bit like when you start a new class, right? You get to class, and maybe as a little kid in grade school, it's like, okay, we're going to meet the classmates around you. You're going to meet a teacher. You're going to get to know where the bathroom is, what to do if you have to throw up, you know, those basic things. And the more you get older, the age as you grow up, you know, you start to get a class syllabus, what to expect in the class, what's going to happen, what gets you a good grade. You know, you can look at it kind of like, here's all the stuff that I have to do, but also the heart of a syllabus is, here's how to succeed in this class. If you start a new job, you get a little bit of a job understanding, you get onboarded, a little orientation about what you're going to do. If you move to a new place, you know, you try to figure out where you have to pay your rent or when the mortgage is going to come out, whether your neighbors are nice or not. Can I have my dog in my backyard or not? What day is trash day? Can I park my car on the street or do I have to pull it in the driveway every day? There's new things that we learn with every new experience. We just came off this series talking about a fresh start, about how we've been given a fresh start because of God's grace and His mercy that beckons us into a relationship with Him. But maybe you sat in that series and you're like, okay, great, fresh start, but how do I succeed in this? What does success look like? How does this happen? And that's exactly the place and the starting point for us this morning. For many people, the Ten Commandments is like the new rules or the syllabus that you learned as you start out of class. I'm pretty sure they're important. You know, I'll take some time to read over them later. Or maybe it's like the HOA document or the terms of your mortgage or your rental agreement. You think you'll probably need it at some point, but for now, you're just going to kind of tuck it away. And you'll know that it's there. No real impact, no real meaning or purpose, but you know it's there. But I want to pose for you this morning, what if the Ten Commandments is less about something that we file away and more about what it displays for us to be in relationship with God and what it reveals for who He is? What if it serves a little bit less like rules and a bit more like a mirror of who God is, the work He has done, and who we are in light of that truth? What if there's more to the Ten Commandments than simply rules by this crazy, egotistical God who, before tablets were popular by Apple, wrote on his own tablets and had a little bit more to say about this guiding hope for a relationship with God himself? You know, the Ten Commandments, we find them in both the book of Exodus, but also in the book of Deuteronomy. So if you've got your Bible with you this morning, I want to encourage you to open with us. We're going to actually look at where we find them in Deuteronomy. So if you are totally unfamiliar with the Bible or just starting out, the very first book you're going to turn to, the very first pages are Genesis. Then you go to Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And these first 5 books are really a historical, It's a historical document for us of what happened, especially when we get to Exodus. It's like, here's how it happened. And so in Exodus 20, we see the Ten Commandments, but we also come back to them in Deuteronomy chapter 5, and that's where we're going to pick up this morning. Now, to give you the 180-second overview of what happened to get us here into Deuteronomy. Creation account says that the God created Adam and Eve. He placed them in the garden. He said it was very good. All that he had created was very good. And he placed them in to work this garden and to live and to thrive, to experience relationship with him, to experience intimacy with him. But then the fall enters in. They chose, we can have our God complex, but not actually have God, and this is great. We'll just take the fruit that we were forbidden from eating because we don't actually need God. We can be God ourselves. They take a bite, and instantly there's the fall. Instantly there's separation. Instantly there's a breakdown in the relationship. The relationship that they were created for to experience intimacy with God was now wounded by their choice to say, we want to be like God, but we don't actually want God. And so there's sin and there's destruction, there's murder, there's evil. And as you walk through the book of Genesis, that first book, you see that finally God says, enough is enough. I'm done with this. I'm going to save 8 people, saves Noah and his wife and their children and their wives and a bunch of animals. And basically gets to start all over, right? And 400 years later, there's a man that shows up on the scene named Abraham. Not Abraham Lincoln, it's a different Abraham. And this Abraham, God says, I'm going to have a covenant with you. You're going to be blessed to be a blessing to others. I'm going to create from you, who have no children, I'm going to create a vast multitude of people who have you as their father, who can look back to see you as their father. And Abraham says, that's great, but I don't have any kids. And so about 100 years later, when Abraham's 100, he has one son, and his son's name is Isaac. Good job. So I will make you as numerous as the stars in the sky is the promise that God makes to Abraham. Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has a son named Jacob, and Jacob's other name after he wrestles with God is Israel. Israel has a son, Jacob. This guy whose name is Israel has a son. His name is Joseph. Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers, and God provides out of a very crummy situation by taking what was meant for evil and bringing glory to himself through it. And he preserves this family line, this line that he had promised Abraham, I will make you the nation. I will make you a father of this great nation, as numerous as the stars in the sky. And so out of this provision, Joseph and his family are in Egypt, and out of Egypt about 400 years pass, and they are no longer notoriety in the land. Instead, they've actually flipped the entire script, and they are enslaved in this land of Egypt. And what started out as a family of a few is now a great multitude. Hey, good job, Abraham. But the Israelite people, and what we read about them, is a continuation of this covenant that God made with Abraham 500 years earlier, blessed to be a blessing. But they are not living as kings in the land. They are not living as chosen people. They are enslaved and they're in bondage. And God intervenes in a powerful way for the Israelites' behalf. He sends 10 plagues upon the land of Egypt. The climax of the plagues, the atomic bomb, if you will, is the death of the firstborn, that's saved only by those who had the blood of the lamb on the doorposts of their homes. And we have the first Passover. And we'll talk more about at the table. But it points us to the cross. It points us to the fact that God is at work, and God intervenes in this powerful way. The Israelites are finally told that they can go free. They take off for the desert. They walk through the middle of the Red Sea. They have this incredible encounter with God at likely the same mountain that that Abraham encountered God, and that this promise was made. And they're given these 10 commandments, this explanation, this provision for thriving in a relationship with him. And that's what Exodus chapter 20 gets us to. I know, that was a little bit more than 180 seconds. I should have practiced a little bit faster. From creation, the fall, and God's redeeming story, these people that he has already begun a covenant with. These commandments, these rules, this explanation of who God is and the provision for a relationship with him is necessary because of their past bondage and slavery. Now, you would think that as the Israelites had this grand encounter with God, that they saw all these incredible things happen, that they walked through on dry land as the Red Sea was parted, you would think that whatever God said, they would, write it down and really cling to it. But unfortunately, even as Moses is getting the 10 Commandments from God, they are choosing to turn their devotion somewhere else. They're choosing to embrace serving something else. And ultimately, they stand at the edge of the desert and they say, we can't go into the promised land. We don't think God is good enough. We don't think this will actually happen. And God says, okay, I'll just keep you from it then. And they spend the next 40 years wandering in the desert, basically, until all of those that could have made a decision died. They're basically wandering in the desert for 40 years, waiting for all those who are in the adults to die. And that the ones who chose to reject God, despite what he had already done for them, were no more. And finally, they're ready to leave the desert and enter this land that they were promised to Abraham, to the people that they were being set free from bondage. And then here's where we pick up in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Moses is reminding them of what has happened and how they were amazingly and victoriously set free from slavery in Egypt when they had no hope or future, and how God had set them up to be in a relationship with him and his provision for such a relationship. Now, I'm sorry that we have to go through all of this, but it's easy to take a New Testament passage and be like, okay, here's where we can connect with this. But we're talking thousands of years have passed. This is all before Jesus shows up on the scene, and it's important for us to understand the context by which we step into. And because we're going to spend the next 4 weeks in this, I felt like, man, we'll take the time in the first 5 minutes to really set this. So if you don't care about history, I'm sorry, wake back up, because here we go into Deuteronomy chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. And if you've got a Bible with you this morning, I want to encourage you to open it. If you don't have a Bible with you, there's one in the seat in front of you. If you're online with us this morning, we'd love for you to be in Deuteronomy chapter 5 with us as well. And here's what Moses says. Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, "Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the rules that I speak in your hearing today, and you shall learn them and be careful to do them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Not with our fathers did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, who are all of us here alive today. The Lord spoke with you face to face at the mountain, out of the midst of the fire, while I stood between the Lord and you at that time, to declare to you the word of the Lord. For you were afraid because of the fire, and you did not go up into the mountain." And he says, this is what God said, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me." This first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods beside me. You shall have no other God, not just in front of me, but at all. It's me alone. You shall have no other gods that you're giving your allegiance or your devotion or your love to. See, loving God alone was necessary for the Israelites for this very first piece, because everything else is going to follow on this. It's necessary because of their past bondage and their slavery. They didn't know what to do. Here is these people who have, for the last 400 years, been following the directions of somebody else. They have lived as people in this land that they don't claim to, following the customs and the culture around them. It was so easy for them to slip into that mindset of the Egyptians, because they were the people who had control over them. So here's this set-free people, these people with a fresh start, with a brand new beginning, and they need this acknowledgement that there is not to be other gods, but one God. And the claiming is by the God who set them free. See, loving God alone for us as well is necessary because we have been redeemed from our past bondage. There's not a lot that we have to jump through hoops to make this connection for us. That for the Israelite people, they had to recognize that it is loving God alone. You shall have no other gods before me, beside me at all. And it's necessary that we have that understanding because we, just like the Israelites, have been set free from our past bondage. The default for you and I is not one of serving God. Our default as we were born and as we were raised up is one of sin, of seeking evil, of seeking our own selfish gain. And so when we enter into this fresh start, as we enter into a relationship with God, if we want to know how this is meant to be, we have to recognize that God's call is that He and He alone would be the one that we hold as God. That you shall have no other gods before me, besides me. Here's what happens, is that we will willingly take on the burden of slavery to whatever we think will bring us life. We're that messed up. Can we confess that we're that messed up this morning? Our default is to align ourselves with what will provide us what we think we want at the moment, regardless of what it truly costs us. And God's saying, no, I have better for you. It's the heart of sin. This is what we've been doing from the beginning. It's the heart of sin. It's the choice to disobey God, to reject Him, to ignore Him, and to pursue what we want at the cost of becoming enslaved and deprived. For the Israelites, there's a very real impact of their past bondage. It's all that they have known. They've never known. Think about this. They have never known a life without bondage and slavery. They've always been under someone else's control. You and I, previous to entering into a relationship with God, have never known a life without sin and our choice to follow it. But suddenly, because of what we can see on this side, because of what Jesus has done on the cross, we're given the opportunity to follow God alone, to be in relationship with Him, to not be enslaved, and to experience the real relationship, real purpose, real joy, real life. You know, these 10 Commandments, if you were to keep reading, they very much mirror the agreements of the Near Eastern people. You start with this preamble. Who is the conquering king? He says, I am the one who brought you out of slavery. And here's the terms of our agreement. But unlike every other conquering king's thing, it was, here's what I've already done for you. See, this is huge for us to recognize that these commandments, this very first one indeed, is not given to the Egyptians. It's not given to the Canaanites, the people who occupy the land that the Israelites are going to walk into right after this. No, it's given to the Israelite people, the people who have already been redeemed. The 10 Commandments, and this one in particular, are given to people who are already redeemed. These are not conditions for survival. These are conditions that are in place because they have already been redeemed, because of what God has already done. It's a little bit like a summons to stop living in the old way and make a fresh start. In Egypt, the idea, and in Canaan, most of the Near Eastern areas, it was this idea that God has a limited area that He can actually work. And He has a limited scope of what He can actually do. So this God may have power at this tree to bring rain, but His area of dominion is limited to that little plot of land or that little tree. Or His area of dominion, even if He can go anywhere, He can only control fertility, or He can only control rain, or He can only control war. So the idea that these Israelites are walking into is that God is limited. And He says, no. You don't need to be concerned with finding all the other gods, because I'm the only God. I'm the only one worth worshiping. I'm the only one that has control. And my control is not limited, and my dominion is not limited. What I can do is not limited. You don't need to worry about trying to find all the other gods. This just stays in the mindset, because way a long time later, there's a guy named Paul who shows up and he says, I found this tribute to this unknown God. Like, it's so wrapped up in our brains that somebody else must be out there that we need, that God isn't enough. And from the very beginning of this relationship with the Israelites, God says, I'm enough. I'm more than enough. I'm overflowing. I'm more than what you need. But can you trust me? God puts this to Israel not as an issue of theology, but of loyalty. A matter not of the mind simply, but ultimately it's a matter of the heart. And so we're getting to the heart of the matter. You know, in most places we tend to fear, wrong spot. This is why I don't use a manuscript, right? He says, if you would just believe. It was not enough for the Israelites just to worship one God only. They needed to get on good terms with all of them, or else they would constantly be exposed to the ill will of the gods of the one that they had neglected, with consequent loss of the good things that was special to these other gods. And God shows up on the scene and says, no, you don't have to try and figure this out to match up all the other gods. There are no other gods that you need to worship. Think of how freeing this truly is. No longer trying to figure it out to please every God or fearing that you've missed one. These words that He says, I am the God. I am here. I am your God. Wherever you go, there's no place you can go from my presence. I'm not limited to a spot or area of authority. Sometimes we think about God and about how we fear him. And the idea is that oftentimes we avoid fear about God. We simplify who God is to such a meaningless, vanilla expression that we are left with nothing to be in awe about. We're going to skip past 5 and go to 6 real quick, but here's how Moses summarizes. He says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you shall be on your heart." So what does this mean to love God? What does this mean to love that there is one God, to place our trust, that I don't have to go seeking out all these other things that might be fulfilling, that I can actually rest in this and worship him alone? What does this truly mean to love God, to trust him, to be obedient to him, to worship him? And I want to say that there's 3 things this morning. Loving God alone requires for us an intentional choice, that he is worthy of our exclusive and complete trust. This is exactly what he's trying to get to the Israelites, to understand that they don't have to spend their time worrying about whether they pleased all the right people, whether they pleased all the right gods. Maybe I'm the only people pleaser in this room, but oftentimes I create people to be gods of sorts that I have to seek their approval. And it's always like, I don't know who I'm going to offend. I don't know who I'm going to not take care of this week. Loving God alone requires this intentional choice that he alone is worthy of our exclusive and complete trust. For the Israelites, fighting this mindset that they must please all of the gods and the gods have limits, this is incredible. And it will take an intentional choice by them to overcome this, to say, no, I don't have to run after everything else. Instead, I can choose to embrace that. It's intentional to draw near to him, and it's an intentional choice to reject others, to reject the call of everything else that wants my devotion that I'm supposed to be giving towards God and that I want to give towards God. Right? It's not even scripted like, hey, you have to do this. This is the God who says, I have already redeemed you. I've already drawn you into a relationship with myself. I've already claimed you as my people. Just live out of this abundance. Recognize who I am. Make this intentional choice to love me alone. See, loving God alone is rooted in his glory. Loving God alone is rooted in his glory. If we were to go back a few pages into Deuteronomy 4, and I apologize that we're going all over the place with this, but Deuteronomy chapter 4, he says, "Now ask of the days that are past, which were before you since the day that God created man on the earth, and ask from one end of heaven to the other, whether such a great thing as this has ever happened or was ever heard of. Did any people ever hear the voice of a God speaking out of the midst of the fire as you've heard and still live? Or has any God ever attempted to go and take a nation for himself from the midst of another nation, by trials, by signs, by wonders, and by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great deeds of terror, all of which the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? To you it was shown that you might know that the Lord is God. There is no other besides him. Out of heaven he let you hear his voice that he might discipline you. And on earth he let you see his great fire, that you heard his words out of the midst of the fire. And because he loved your fathers and chose their offspring after them and brought you out of Egypt with his own presence, by his great power, driving out before you nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in, to give you their land for an inheritance, as it is this day. Know therefore today, and lay it to your heart, that the Lord is God in heaven above, and on the earth beneath. There is no other." See, God's glory is wrapped up, verse 40. "Therefore you shall keep his statutes and his commandments, which I command you today, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, and that you may prolong your days in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for all time." Moses is calling them to remember what great power God displayed, that this is not a weeny little God, that this isn't a God that they can't trust, but this is a God they can place their complete and exclusive trust in. See, God's glory is wrapped up in the success of his people and their good. He didn't need their success for him to have glory, but his glory, his power, his authority, his incredible graciousness was made known by his people living out who they were created by him and called by him to be. The glory of God demands our fear because of who he is. It's what gives us a deep sense of awe in his presence, and it's what drives our response, our worship, our daily obedience. When there is no fear, there is no sense of obligation and no sense of gratitude that we have stood in the presence of God and lived to tell about it. Check this out. In chapter 5, verses 22, they're recounting, the Israelite people are recounting back to Moses what they've just seen happen, that God has just spoken to them. It says, these words the Lord spoke to all of the assembly at the mountain out of the midst of the fire, the cloud, and the thick darkness with a loud voice, and he added no more. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone and gave them to me. And as soon as you Israelite people, heard the voice out of the midst of the darkness, while the mountain was burning with fire, you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders. And you said, behold, the Lord our God has shown us his glory and greatness, and we have heard his voice out of the midst of the fire. This day we have seen God speak with man, and man still live. Now therefore, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of God, if we hear the voice of the Lord our God anymore, we shall die. Here's the mindset they're walking into. Holy cow, we just had this radical encounter with God, and we're not sure we're still actually going to make it out. Maybe we just God gave us a little 5-minute recess, and then he's going to get us. Because the idea that they actually encountered God in a very real and powerful way, that they actually heard his voice, was way too incredible to be true. They're like, Moses, we're going to go sneak away. You stay here. You're probably better than we are. You're more holy than we are. You just talk to God. We're going to take off with our lives while we can. The glory of God was revealed in such an incredible and powerful way. They're like, wow. We're in awe. We're in wonder. We're in fear of God. This is the healthy kind of fear and an amazement of who he is and how he has acted on our behalf. For who is there of all flesh, verse 26, that has heard the voice of the living God speaking out of the midst of fire as we have, and has still lived? Go near and hear all that the Lord our God will say, and speak to us all that the Lord our God will speak to you. And we will hear and do it. And the Lord heard your words. Moses is looking back now, 40 years later. He says, the Lord heard your words when you spoke those to me. And the Lord said to me, I have heard the words of this people, which they've spoken to you. They are right in all that they have spoken. Oh, yeah. It's an incredible thing that I showed up in the way that I did. Oh, that they had such a heart as this always, to fear me and keep all my commandments, that it might go well with them and with their descendants forever. Friends, if I can advocate this morning, we need a bigger picture of who God is. A more grandiose experience of his might, his power, and his authority. Some of us, I think, are just content to be like, hey, God's out there. God's on the mountain. You just go have your little experience, and I'll just be content with kind of the casual Christianity. I'll just be content to open my Bible sometimes. I'll be content to pray sometimes. I'll be content to have God among many. But I think we need a bigger picture of who God is, something that forces us to draw on this awe and wonder of who God truly is. Sometimes we resign God to simply being the custodian or the trash man who comes to pick up our mess. At most, all he requires is us to roll out the trash can to the curb, but otherwise we don't know anything of him. And to trust God, to love God alone requires this fear, this awe, this wonder, and this amazement. To say, God, your glory is on display. Help me to take risks that show off not who I am, but your glory for my good and for your glory's sake. Finally, loving God alone is a response to his love for us. Loving God alone is a response to his love for us. This call that he gave the Israelites, and the same thing that we can identify with this morning, is that this is not a condition of a relationship. This is not, hey, if you follow this, then we'll have a little conversation and I can tell you whether you're in the club or not. No, God says, you're in the club. Loving God alone, this commandment that you shall have no other gods before me, besides me at all, is a response to his love for us, his care for us, his action that he has already done on our behalf. Everything that's communicated from God to Moses and Moses to this people is that the law doesn't make you good. The law shows the good way to experience the hope and the reality of a relationship with God who has already pursued you.